Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, KJ Noons' Knob Gobbler-in-Chief, Jack Slack. It's Thursday the 7th of June, and we're talking about some fights. Fights Gone By, episode 84. I'm sat here with a steaming hot cup of Earl Grey, tea of princes and prince of teas, and I'm absolutely swamped by work at the moment because UFC 225 snuck up on me as one of the best cards this year, on paper at least. Could be garbage in person. Or when it happens, rather. I'm not going there. So yeah, I'm just putting out articles constantly. I did a Marlon Moraes piece on Monday. I did a Tai Tuivasa piece yesterday. I'm working on a Megan Anderson piece today. And then we'll be doing Whittaker Romero 2 on Friday. We'll cover that in a little bit of depth here today. But I do highly recommend you read the article because I have a backspace key on my articles and I don't when I'm talking. So, very informal podcast today because everything is up against the wall, or I'm up against the wall, or whatever's happening. We'll do some quick news, then we'll do some questions. We'll do some quick news. We'll talk about that fight that happened, or rather the couple of fights that happened at the UFC. Wasn't really a lot that I cared about. Then we'll do some questions, and then we'll talk about UFC 225 and how awesome it looks, even the undercard. So, news! Justin Gaethje versus Al Iaquinta is announced for the August 25th card. That is a really good... I don't know if this is a fight night card. It's a really good fight night main event, if it is. Obviously, people are high on Al Iaquinta because he did respectably against Khabib Nurmagomedov on short notice. Really doesn't have much more than a right hand and squatting down really low in his stance to counter Khabib's wrestling. But Justin Gaethje is the kind of guy who'll walk onto your right hand and let you put it on him. So that's a good, fun fight. Sadder news, Dan Kelly is apparently having eye trouble after his knockout loss to Tom Breeze. Combined with Michael Bisping's news of further eye trouble, always a bit sad to get that insight on what's happening with your favourite fighters. Like in Rocky 1, it's revealed in Rocky 2 that he's ruined his eye, because that's why he retires. But then they just forget about it for the next 4 Rockies. Bare Knuckle FC held its first event. I watched it. It was pretty good. I say I've watched it. I have it on my computer. I'm watching through it at present. Beck Rawlins looked great. Everyone was like, got her boxing. Has it always been this sharp? She was fighting a can, to be fair. But, you know, it's a lot crisper when people aren't trying to take her down or kick her in the head. A couple of other schlubby people were on it. But, yeah, it was good fun. Lots of blood. Lots of injured hands. The list of medical suspensions afterwards was incredible. Lots of people suspended indefinitely for broken hands, which is the sort of thing we were talking about when we discussed this ahead of time. So I will definitely be going back to that probably next week and doing an article on it. And then elsewhere, the IBJJF Worlds happened, but nobody gives a fuck because the gi is boring and the IBJJF are corrupt. I watched Keenan Cornelius get robbed. That was sad. And then I watched some blue belts who are instructors at world-class gyms and regularly school competitive black belts on the mat, win the blue belt divisions, or, you know, at least do well in them. Blue belt competition, really not necessary at that level. Like, all you're really doing is padding your record and, you know, I suppose impressing your sponsors, getting sponsors. I don't know, but there is no need for a blue... Like, it wasn't too bad this year, but there are dudes who have won, you know, either the juvenile or some even the adults at blue belt one year and then come back for the Pan Ams or whatever the next year, still as a blue belt. If you've proven you're the best blue belt in the world, you're not a blue belt anymore. But anyway, yeah, just the whole thing was silly, and I had watched EBI 14 for the first time just before that, and EBI is so much better. It's just so much more entertaining. And, you know, it's kind of dull just watching people cry about knee reaps and hold on to gis for dear life. Right, let's talk about the UFC event that happened at the weekend. What happened? Oh, Jose Torres made his UFC debut. Not Jose Torres, the Jose Torres we all know, but Jose Torres, the new Jose Torres. Angel Torres? I don't know. But he was fighting Jared Brooks. I think he came in on fairly short notice. But he got his shit pushed in for the first round and much of the second round before Jared Brooks picked him up and tried to Samoa drop him and then knocked himself out. And then Jared Brooks afterwards sent him a tweet being like, 9 times out of 10 I beat you, and the 10th time I only lose because I knocked myself out. Which means that in 10% of fights he'd knock himself out, which is amazing. Yeah, crazy finish. Fair play to Torres for hanging in there. Nathaniel Wood's debut was fun enough. Johnny Eduardo, who looks like the one of the creator fighters that you fight in LFA or RFA or wherever it is on the career mode of UFC, he came out and put it on Nathaniel Wood, but then got Braboed, which was pretty cool. Everyone loves a good Bravo choke. It says Bravo choke here. We mean Das. Isn't the Bravo specifically with the gi? That's what I've always considered it. Never mind. David Tamer won his fight. Sam Alvey beat Jean Vellante, ruining my parlay because, fucking Jean Vellante. He shouldn't even be in the UFC. He's really boring, and he's not even very good. Ben Saunders TKO Jake Ellenberger. Walt Harris beat Daniel Spitz, but fuck if I'm watching a heavyweight bout. Gregor Gillespie versus Vink Pichel. I really liked this one. Gregor Gillespie I always enjoy watching. He's keeping quite a busy pace at the moment. And yeah, Pichel had something like 90% takedown defense in his previous 3 fights, had been off for a while with an injury, and Gillespie just took him down at will, and then arm triangled him, which was lovely. Gregor Gillespie, very fun fighter, apparently the best fisherman in MMA. 10 out of 10, would watch again. And then the main event, which is the one we all cared about, Marlon Moraes beats Jimmie Rivera by a head kick KO. Man, do I love me some Marlon Moraes. I spoke about this in my article earlier this week, but Marlon Moraes came into the UFC as one of those guys who was a champion in an outside organisation, but was essentially padding up his record against nobodies. Nobody on his record before he gets to the UFC has a Wikipedia page, which is always quite damning, but, not a tremendously impressive bunch that WSOF assembled for him. And similar to Eddie Alvarez, Luke Rockhold, Justin Gaethje, Gilbert Melendez, anyone who comes in as like the Alter Rex, a guy with the title outside of the UFC who could legitimately be top 10. There's a great deal of anticipation from a lot of fans, and there's also a great deal of fans hoping for them to fail so that they can say, yeah, well, this is a different level now. And it is a different level now. Let's not pretend that Bellator or Strikeforce were ever on the same level as the UFC. However, some of those guys have gone on to win titles. With that being said, Luke Rockhold, Eddie Alvarez, the guys who went on to win titles, also lost their first fight, so you'd think that people were a little bit more used to it not meaning everything, but for a lot of fight fans it still does, your first fight when you come in, which is why it was really weird that when Marlon Moraes came in as hot shit, they put him on the undercard in the prelims against Rafael Assunção, one of the hardest fights at bantamweight. Rafael Assunção, who in the past, 10 years, whatever, but no, since 2011, I think it was. He hasn't lost to anyone not named TJ Dillashaw, and even then, it was pretty close. So, a very tricky guy, has that he uses a very long stance, uses weird pushing kicks and long straight punches, and draws people out and tries to counter them. And a very, very low-paced fighter. There's like 4 exchanges around, and he wins most of them. And this is what I said about Assunção and Rivera in my post-fight piece. They are the worst possible fights for a young, exciting bantamweight to take because they win most of the time. They're very, very good. They're very, very boring because they don't finish fights. They're not boring for you and I who enjoy a technical showcase, but for the majority of fight fans, they're boring. And they have no inbuilt drama with Team Alpha Male, so they're never getting a title shot. So all you're doing is you're sacrificing your momentum to Rafael Assunção or Jimmie Rivera most of the time. However, in that Moraes-Assunção fight, he really showed how to put it on. Assunção, he's using hundreds of feints, used the double jab really well, jabbing, ducking, and countering, drawing Assunção forward onto him, and Assunção is half the man on offense that he is on the counter. So really good fight. Unfortunately, he got his bell rung by 2 right hands, one in the first and one in the second, which seemed to basically sell 2 judges on the fight. That was one of those fights that was very bizarre because the judges had it 30-27 both ways, which shouldn't be possible really, but was. So yeah, that one stuck in people's craw a bit. He had that close fight with John Dodson, where he got cracked early but then really worked Dodson out. It was the opposite of the Munoz fight where Dodson was doing the same thing over and over again and this guy was actually countering it in multiple different ways, whereas Munoz was just taking it on the face and walking forward. Then he had the knockout of Aljamain Sterling, which surprised him because it wasn't even what he was going for. And then he knocked out Jimmie Rivera with the first head kick he threw up and surprised himself again. Obviously, the knockouts get him more attention, but the other two fights really show the versatility and craft of Marlon Moraes that those two quick knockouts really don't. But quick knockouts get you noticed, and quick knockouts are what are going to get you a title shot. That's why Cody Garbrandt soared up the rankings and into the title shot so quickly, while Rafael Sansao had a considerably better record. But anyway, it took like 30 seconds to ruin Jimmie Rivera's 20-fight, 10-year winning streak. So Moraes is pretty much in the title picture now when they're done running back Garbrandt, Dillashaw pointlessly. Unless, of course, Garbrandt wins, and then we get a rubber match in another year's time, and we all die a little inside. Though if Garbrandt did win, it would free TJ Dillashaw up to go to flyweight and chase Demetrius Johnson for a fight that we actually cared about. So that was that event. Didn't rate it much, but it was nice to see Marlon Moraes get his win. Kind of disappointing that it didn't go longer, to be honest, because Moraes' long fights have been really impressive for me as a striking nerd, or as an MMA nerd generally. But, you know, this gets me the attention, which is good. Right, let's do some questions. JS, I love your podcast. Very infotaining, and I'm in awe of your fighting knowledge. Hope you got the time to answer a trivial question. That's all I do, mate. When you make your Octagon debut, what will your walkout song be? What style of fighter would you like Bruce Buffer to introduce you as? And what will be your fighting appellation? In homage to my favourite boxer, my nickname would be The Entertainer. And I would come out to the Scott Joplin song of the same name. Rob J, an Aikido and Tai Chi fighter. P.S. Like the Blur reference in your intro a couple of podcasts ago, forget the Mac Life. When are the Slack Life videos coming out? Cheers, Rob. I think for entrance music, I always said I'd like Werewolves of London, because, you know, you get the crowd involved, especially if it's an English crowd. Hey Jude is always an easy one for a British fighter to enter to. Like Aisling, whatever her name was, from Straight Blast Gym, used to enter to Zombie. Nobody gave a shit about her, but they loved that song. The Irish, that is. Could bum everyone out and enter to The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel, which is objectively a great song, but super depressing. I think, if we go back to the fighting style, I think I'd have to be a Sistema fighter, or Sistema, however they pronounce it in Soviet Russia. Actually, if we work off that, I'd call myself a Sistema fighter, one of the proud British Sistema fighters. It's a good lineage. Me and Martin Wheeler, just throwing tennis balls at each other and playing with guns. And then I'd be called the Tsar of the Princeton Bar, which would involve both my Russian lineage and my British lineage. And then I would enter to Ra Ra Rasputin by Boney M. and do the entire dance. I'd have my cornermen do it with me and we'd be squatting down. Like that Black Family on YouTube. It'd be amazing. Cheers, Rob. Hey, Jack, big fan of the podcast. I know that guys like Jose Aldo are considered to be anti-wrestlers. Do you think you could highlight some of this or other anti-wrestlers' techniques that are good at negating wrestling? I'm particularly interested in what tactics and initiatives such fighters use, such as whether they should pressure or outfight or throw more volume over less. Thanks from Tommy. Well, Aldo is the best example that you can come up with because he's just, he's twice the fighter against wrestlers that he is against strikers. His worst fights were against guys who typically we didn't consider as dangerous, like the Korean Zombie or Hominick, or when Mendez learned to strike for a very brief period. But a lot of Jose Aldo is in the pivot around the lead leg. He likes to fight in a longer stance, and he likes to feed the single, which means when someone goes for his hips, he lengthens that stance, and pivoting out really helps presenting that lead leg and the lead hip, but not giving them the rear leg and rear hip to drive through on the double. And this is something that BJ Penn and Big Nog even used to do back in the day. Feed the single, and then you have a little bit more time to work. It's not the same as being ploughed straight through on a double. Anyone in the world, if they get caught throwing a right hand and the other guy ducks under just in time, they're going to be bundled to the floor with a double leg. Single leg takes a little bit more nuance to finish. There's a lot of different ways the guy can move. There's a lot of different ways you can try and finish the single. And what guys like BJ Penn found is that in that time you can hop back towards the fence, use it to hold you up, and then, the other guy will start dropping down and looking to pick up the other ankle and things like that. And it gives you a chance to work your grips, turn them around, or even just strike from there. BJ Penn had a really good uppercut that he used to do with the palm, basically like Bas Rutten, the inside of the wrist, smashing upwards. And Penn would land that hopping around and on one leg along the fence. And nowadays we use Travis Brown elbows because we realise that they're legal due to a blind spot in the rules. But those are all very good. Penn used to look for the switch from the fence once he'd fed the single and hopped there. Jose Aldo has done that a couple of times. Or double underhooks on one arm and whipping it over your head. Eddie Alvarez did that against... Who was that? Might have been Pettis. Oh no, it was RDA. I'm a real big fan of the ninja choke, which was the one that Arnold Allen caught Mads Burrell with the other day. The idea is that you leave the arm out there so that when they go for your hips, their head's just in the choke already. You just snap it up. Basically like a power guillotine. A lot of the best guys at being anti-wrestlers without, engaging in wrestling are guys like Anderson Silva and Dominic Cruz and people like that, who are hard to take down by merit of not being there to be taken down. I often say it, but footwork is way more important than actually wrestling in the fight. Obviously you have to be able to wrestle at a high level because you will get caught at some point, but it's a lot easier to just not provide the opportunity to shoot than it is to fight off each shot. It also means you're a lot less likely to fall for a fake shot into a left hook or uppercut or whatever. If you are the kind of guy who just sprawls on takedowns, like the old days, you're very susceptible to that. Cheers, Tommy. Hey, Jack, the podcast slacker. Whoa, steady on, I never said there'd be two this week. Big fan of the podcast, and your views on having different weapons when changing stance has really changed the way that I look at fighting southpaw. Anyway, now that I've finished sucking your dick, I'll get to the question. I've been training K1 for just over a year, and I am currently looking for a local interclub to get some experience before taking some amateur fights. One thing I've noticed about amateur K1 is that there is a lot of swanging and banging. The issue being that I'm a very passive fighter and prefer to have slower, more technical fights. In sparring, I use body kicks, as I have pretty powerful kicks on both sides to control the pace. The smarter or more experienced guy will catch and counter, or just not be there and counter. What would be your advice to help me control the pace versus a more aggressive fighter? Also, my hands are trash. Oh, there we go. There goes my first piece of advice. Apart from a decent fake jab to hook while moving my foot to the outside to make an angle for the right kick. How would you advise hiding this weakness in a fight while I'm focusing on improving my boxing? Also, I'm reading The Fight by Norman Mailer. Great book, thanks for the recommendation. I'd like to recommend you read The Big Fight by Sugar Ray Leonard. Sorry for the awful grammar, I'm writing this between Glory 54 rounds. Thanks in advance for the help and have a nice day. From Liam. One way to deal with a boxing disadvantage is to focus on drawing the opponent forwards at all times and making them open up a little bit more towards you, which also plays into the body kicking and heavy round kicking game. You want them to settle down. One great way to make people settle down is the nodder, which I'm not going to advocate because it's illegal, but the same principle is backstepping, drawing people forward, and then intercepting them with it, whether it be a knee or an elbow or something like that. The easiest one, or probably the most... Actually, probably the only legal one, amateur K1, is the right hand lead, or just the intercepting right hand straight into the clinch. If you get good at that, you can make people really reluctant to step in aggressively, because what happens is they get hit and then they get smothered so that they can't counter or can't continue the exchange and get some points off. So I think that would probably be my recommendation. That and the leaping left hook into the clinch too. That was a Floyd Mayweather. Those two were basically Floyd Mayweather's go-tos against really aggressive guys. If you watch the Hatton fight, it's just constant backing up, right hand clinch, backing up, left hook clinch. So all you really need to do is learn to back up, slam that right foot into the floor, throw the right hand, and then immediately weave into the clinch, ideally under their left arm. Or throw the left hook and just straight down, lower your body, keep your body upright so that you're less susceptible to the uppercut, and just place your head on their chest immediately afterwards, and come up with underhooks, preferably. So those are good options. Alternatively, learn to push kick and fight more like a Thai, but that's not my area of expertise. I've always hated push kicking. I'm a snap kicker, bro. Cheers, Liam. Right, let's talk about these fights this weekend. Quick shout out to one that's probably not going to get much notice because it's on the same night. At KSW 44, Kleber Koika Herbst fights. Very fun grappler, really limited striking, but amazing game off his back. Great Darce chokes from the top. Holds a win over Yusuke Yachi back in Pancrase and beat Miguel Torres. Oh, that's who I was thinking of, not Jose Torres, Miguel Torres. But he won the vacant featherweight title in KSW over Artur Sawinski back in December. But his bout with Marcin Rosek was cancelled due to Rosek having a chest injury, and now he's fighting Marian Zulski, which is a catchweight fight, 150 pounds, which explains why there's no belt on it. Though the featherweight belt has been tricky to keep up with. But well worth your time to watch, because he is such an oddity. Yeah, and like his... since 2012, only one of his wins has been a decision. He has submitted a lot of dudes. Anyway, UFC 225 is why we're here, so let's talk about that. From the bottom to the top, Mike Santiago, Dan Ige, whoever, don't know, don't really care. Charles Oliveira versus Clay Guida, that's a good fight. Charles Oliveira improved his wrestling recently, over the last few years. Wrestled Will Brooks, which I was impressed by. And very, very good at taking backs. Clay Guida, sort of an old dog. But, Charles Oliveira is chinny. But Clay Guida is pillow-fisted. Oh, how do we work this out? More interestingly, Joseph Benavidez is returning against Sergio Pettis. Joseph Benavidez sort of disappeared after that Tim Elliott submission, following the second loss to Demetrius Johnson. But he had been beating good guys. John Moraga, Ali Bagutinov, Zach Makovsky. Had that fight with Henry Cejudo in 2016. Very controversial fight in terms of the decision. Split decision win for Benavidez. Very good fight, but caused a lot of controversy. But that was December 2016, and he tore his ACL in the run-up to a fight with Ben Wynn in 2017. So he's finally coming back, and he's fighting Sergio Pettis. And Pettis is the guy that we're sort of waiting to put it together. Well, he was an early front runner for like the top prospect in the featherweight division, but Henry Cejudo just beat him recently, December again. Had a good fight with John Moraga, but even that fight, Moraga was landing good punches on him. He's just not as slick as we originally thought he was. Guys are getting better in that division, on the feet at least. But it'll be good to have Benavidez back. I think he's working with Team Alpha Male rather than Bang. He was looking good with Bang. He started developing some kicks and stuff. But, if you train with Team Alpha Male, it's overhands and guillotines, and that's about it. Especially since they got rid of Buckles. So, be interesting to see what he's got there. He's definitely one who should go and join another team, to be honest, because he's pretty much reached his potential with guillotines and overhands. But we'll see. Maybe he smokes Sergio Pettis and we're talking about him getting a third fight against Demetrius Johnson. Or just a rematch with Henry Cejudo. That'd be nice. Rashad Evans versus Anthony Smith. This one makes me very uncomfortable. Rashad Evans failed to get cleared by 2 commissions, so they shopped him around and finally got him cleared. Hasn't looked good since then. Anthony Smith coming off that loss to Thiago Santos. But before that had knocked out Hector Lombard, Andrew Sanchez, Elvis Mutapcic. So a decent guy, a dangerous hitter, and just not really the sort of fight you want to see Rashad Evans in. And also we're at light heavyweight now. So, it is, Smith's a middleweight, a fairly big one, but a middleweight. But the whole thing, any time that a fighter is going I'm going to move down weight, I think I should have been at a lower weight my entire career, this will be the rebirth, and then suddenly he's moving up weight again. This guy's just looking for excuses why he keeps losing, and he hasn't managed to come to terms with the fact that he's just not got it anymore. He's just old. But, takes time. He'll have to be knocked out a few more times. In fact, as we're on the subject, we've got Overeem and Arlovsky on this same card, so we'll get onto that in a second. Rashad Coulter versus Chris De La Rocha, do not care. Saw Coulter against Taito Ivasa, doesn't have much. Claudia Gadelha versus Carla Esparza. You'd think that that's a Claudia Gadelha fight because she is so big and strong at that weight. And Carla Esparza really only has the takedowns. And, Claudia Gadelia's striking sucks, and she gasses in the end of the, midpoint of the second round. She's always gassed. But, I can't see Carla Esparza boxing her up. I would love to see Carla Esparza box her up. That would be hilarious. But it feels like Gadelia should be the favourite there. Bektic versus Lamas. Lamas sounds good. You've got great ground and pounder versus a bit of a wall and staller. Lamas's striking consists largely of just wheel kicks. Actually, he's another one of those guys who, when he's confident wrestling and, feels like he can get away with it, when he feels like he can do whatever he wants, he strikes very competently. When something starts to go even slightly wrong, he panics and becomes wild and winging from the outside. Much like Phil Davis and Ryan Bader, when they're overmatched, or when they've got an opponent who's overmatched, their striking looks very technical and solid. When they're a little bit worried, they just look awful. Alistair Overeem versus Curtis Blades. Curtis Blades obviously coming off that win over Mark Hunt. I mean, I didn't enjoy it too much because it was just wrestling, but and I'm so sad watching Mark Hunt just get beat up nowadays. But Blades is one that people have had their eye on for a while. He had that loss to Francis Ngannou, which is his only loss, but a better game plan, he could have won that fight. And Alistair Overeem obviously always in contention, even though he's the chinniest man in the heavyweight division. But this does excite me because Overeem doesn't really have a reason to be scared of Curtis Blades' hands. Overeem becomes... again, he's another one with this problem where he just starts running and striking awfully against guys whose hands he's worried about. Whereas when he's... And it doesn't make much sense either. Francis Ngannou is not a scarier striker than Mark Hunt. But against Mark Hunt, and Ben Rothwell's not a scarier striker than Mark Hunt. But against Mark Hunt, Overeem fought perfectly. He was beautiful, in and out, perfectly measured, always all the way in or on the outside, and working him over from all sorts of distances with all sorts of techniques, and taking hits and being fine. But then against Rothwell and Ngannou, he's throwing these right hands, and Haritanov too. He's throwing these right hands and then turning his back and running away, and never really getting in or out. He's just sort of lingering mid-range. So very strange, but I can't see him being that worried against Curtis Blades. His main concern is the wrestling. I'd be very interested to see if he can get off his knees in the clinches when Blades shoots for takedowns. And Overeem, pretty underrated on his back. Not incredibly technical, but very aggressive. The Kimura to arm lock that he scored on Hunt all those years ago. Not particularly orthodox, but pretty cool nonetheless. And of course, Overeem's whole thing was the guillotine for a very long time, and Blades is, known for shooting takedowns. Then you got CM Punk versus Mike Jackson, the one that's got everyone offended, because the last fight we talked about, Overeem versus Blades, was on the undercard, or has been moved to the undercard, and CM Punk's on the main card. And Dana White said, when Alistair Overeem moves as many pay-per-views, we can talk about that. Obviously, just being obtuse, because he pays Alistair Overeem $800,000 every time Alistair Overeem wins. That's the contract they've got him on. They gave Alistair Overeem a ton of money to come fight for them. And, even with all the losses and the re-signing of the contracts, he's still making almost $1 million every time he wins. So, they don't see him as a guy who can just pad out prelims. He is very much on the prelims, basically because they couldn't move anyone else. Ideally you'd move Colby Covington to the prelims, but they have a belt on that, and it really shits on the belt if you move him to the prelims. So, what do we know about Punk and Jackson? Jackson is, he's kickboxed before. He looked all right. His first fight was against Mickey Gall and he lost. CM Punk's first fight was against Mickey Gall and he lost. CM Punk, we're told he wants to stand up and strike, but to be honest, he would have been better off just hanging out with Henna for the entire time and just working on his grappling. That's where you can make up for a lack of explosiveness and a lack of just years and years of training pinpoint counters and things. I would not be surprised if he tries to take down Mike Jackson, because Mike Jackson is, pretty one-dimensional himself. But both, got beaten up by Mickey Gall, and Mickey Gall is a lot better on the ground than his record indicated, as shown when he fought Sage Northcutt. But that is, that's a circus fight. We don't really need to talk about that at any great length.
Sometimes these things happen in MMA.
And I'm back with new tea. What were we talking about? Mike Jackson versus CM Punk. Yeah, As I put it to someone on Twitter today, I've never seen CM Punk get outstruck. So we don't know what he's got. I really hope he does win, to be honest, because he just gets so much shit from people all the time. And obviously he doesn't deserve to be on a UFC card, but you do whatever, you're not going to fight for free or for $500 on whatever shithole local card if you can get $1 million doing the thing that you supposedly love and want to do in the UFC. The UFC would be crazy to not use him when he's going to get so many people to tune in. Anyway, on to the real fights again. Andrei Arlovski versus Tai Tuivasa. Oh, okay, we'll have to wait a little bit before we get to the real fights. But you know what's supposed to happen here. Tai Tuivasa is supposed to knock out Andrei Arlovski in, shocking fashion. Andrei Arlovski is closing in on Alistair Overeem's record for most knockouts on a UFC fighter's record. In the UFC alone, this one should take him up to level with Overeem, but Overeem has a few in kickboxing and outside of the UFC. Arlovski's been with the UFC a lot longer. Basically, neither of these men should be licensed to fight ever again. They shouldn't have been for a couple of fights now. But they are. So, and people are like, well, they win fights. Yeah, cool, that undoes brain damage. Tragic stuff. But Andrei Arlovski broke his streak of 5 losses, 4 of which were finishes, by wall and stalling 2 opponents back-to-back. If he tries to do the same against Tuivasa, at least we'll get to see Tuivasa tested in grappling against a decent all-rounder. If he tries to swang and bang with Tuivasa, I expect him to get knocked out by an elbow, to be honest. Tai Tuivasa is mad about the right elbow. If you saw him against Cyril Asker, he landed a good counter one and then just ran at him, swinging them for the rest of the fight. Not a very patient fighter. And the Cyril Asker was a setup too, that fight. Was in front of a home crowd. Cyril Asker, not a very good fighter, so they picked him to get knocked out. But anyway, if Tai Tuivasa wins this one, we can throw him in with Overeem, and then we can start talking about the machine again. Punch stats and hitting as hard as a Ford Escort and things like that. Oh, anyway, Holly Holm versus Megan Anderson. I'm going to call her Megan because I'm English and I shouldn't have to say the word Megan. But yeah, she's... This is interesting because people have been going on about Megan Anderson for ages since she beat Charmaine Tweet. And that fight is a lot better the further away you get from it. If you actually watch that fight, it's super unimpressive because it's Charmaine Tweet and Charmaine Tweet rocks her. In fact, I watched through Invicta, all of Megan Anderson's Invicta fights this week because I'm writing an article that's going up today. Just like looking at her habits and stuff, and she has been rocked by every single opponent she's met in Invicta except Cindy Dandois, who easily took her down, so didn't have to fight her with strikes, and Peggy Morgan, who's a punching bag. But she's getting rocked by people who have no business rocking her because she walks people to the fence and then slowly wades in with double right straights and eats right hands over the top. It happened the same way in every fight, and her legs went every time. She's done very well for someone who has no fast twitch muscle fibers. But, I think the thing is that people think she's a striker, and she isn't. What she is very good at clinching people, working in the clinch along the fence, and tiring them out a bit before teeing off on them because they're normally in bad condition, because they're normally, part-time fighters. If there's one thing Holly Holm's good at, it's fighting off a clinch or, getting double underhooks and turning the opponent onto the fence, and countering you if you just move forward aimlessly. So that's quite concerning. Holly Holm is frustrating in her own right because she is, she should be head and shoulders above everyone else in the division. She should be on a level footing with Cyborg. She proved she can take Cyborg's hits. She proved that she can wrestle with Cyborg in the clinch. In the clinch, she was getting the double underhooks on Cyborg and turning her into the fence, but she doesn't do anything from the clinch. She occasionally knees the thigh like Czech Congo. It was her one-note circle, circle, left hand, circle, circle, left hand. If she had other looks and a better game plan, I reckon she could beat Cyborg. Freak out if you will about that, but she has the physical attributes to do it, and she's got decent technique in every area. She just doesn't use an awful lot of methods. But, she also struggles with very mediocre opposition as well. So, probably another ish decision for Holly Holm, I reckon. Mercifully, this is only 3 rounds. What is 5 rounds, and could also be awful, is Colby Covington versus Rafael Dos Anjos. RDA is, at this point, like an all-time great of the sport. In my humble opinion, the guys that he's beaten, and he's done it at 2 weights, yeah, really impressive. They're talking today as if this fight was put together because Conor was going to come back and fight Dos Anjos for the interim title, but I think they slapped the interim title on this later. It's Ariel talking about nonsense. He was also talking about a 4-man tournament, and that would sort of conflict with this, but I don't really care. I'm paid to care when I'm writing rewrites of Notorious. I don't care most of the time. Yeah, I think this will be really interesting, because if, Dos Anjos has 2 recent losses, three, Tony Ferguson. But, the most notable ones are Eddie Alvarez catching him coming forward and Khabib Nurmagomedov just ragdolling him. And Colby Covington is going to be looking to ragdoll him. But Colby Covington's striking is not good. I think what will be interesting is when Dos Anjos gets taken down, or if Dos Anjos gets taken down, whether he strikes with elbows from the bottom and plays a more active, aggressive striking guard in the style of like Tony Ferguson, or if he just keeps trying to get up. Because if he just keeps trying to get up, I can see Covington just keep mat returning him, or trapping an arm and trying to hit him. And it would be interesting to see Dos Anjos actually put the feet on the hips, keep it in the center of the cage, try and turn off the cage, use elbows when he can. But yeah, a really interesting fight. Really looking forward to it. It'd be very interesting to see how much Dos Anjos kicks, like how comfortable he is kicking. He's very good at kicking into the open side on the body and the closed side on the leg, regardless of the stance. If Covington's fighting, he's southpaw, isn't he? So Dos Anjos' left leg is going to go into his lower lead leg, which is nice because that's a good kick that's hard to catch for wrestlers. And in the main event, you got Robert Whittaker, Bobby Knuckles versus Yoel Romero. Interesting because I haven't seen a whole lot of change in Yoel Romero, but it was a close competitive first fight. I think Robert Whittaker very much proved himself the master of Romero in that first fight. It was a very good performance. He had the perfect game plan for Romero, but equally it was close enough that Yoel Romero could come in and do the same things and maybe catch him. And if he does different things, it'll be even more difficult. Romero knocked out Luke Rockhold in between. Not an awful lot of difference noticeable in Romero, aside from occasionally flailing his elbows around and doing the 52, which only impressed you if you know nothing about striking and didn't notice that he wasn't actually doing it in striking range. It was interesting because Rockhold does not have an intelligent jab. He was just doubling and tripling without moving his head, without changing angle, anything like that, but he was still troubling Romero with that. Coming into the first fight, I was saying the most interesting part will be Whittaker's jab, which is really good. It's one of the best in the division, maybe in the sport. He does excellent work with exactly the same thing GSP does. He steps in as if to jab, pauses, and then steps in again with the jab. It's sort of like a shoulder pump feint into a jab. So it's a feint then jab. And he does very, very good things with it. He's hurt a lot of guys with it, like stunned them with it. But I thought that would be very interesting to see how that works against Romero. He uses tons of feints and he uses the jab very well. Unfortunately, in the first fight, his knee was trashed in the opening seconds, and he, on the fly, changed to this 100 front kick game plan, which is just bizarre, but he did it with that, which was incredible. The key here is that Robert Whittaker's counter-wrestling, and wrestling itself, is very, very good. We always talk about it, but when Romero took him down, he'd get up, turning his back, and he'd keep one side flush to the fence and the other knee up in like a kneeling position. Which made it impossible both for Jacare and Romero to put a hook in. So they ended up like kneeing his thigh and doing like nothing that was really causing damage. And every time they pulled the knee back, they gave space. And then he'd stand up and turn into them, putting the elbow back through, and then what is it? Dominic Cruz calls it throwing the flag to get the underhook, or the cruise as we're calling it now. But yeah, it was really, really interesting because he did that in those 2 fights. Like a dozen times between them. So it's really a tried and true method that he showed like a dozen times with 2 really top of the heap different kinds of grappler. Sort of giving up his back but not really giving up his back, and using the fence to get to his feet and turn in. And he's good enough in an over under clinch that he can actually go even with them and escape. I think for Yoel Romero, the problem with Yoel Romero generally is the same that we've always pointed out, but nobody believed it until Robert Whittaker did it. He really likes to take breaks. People say like he's got all these stoppages in the 3rd round, and we're always talking about being explosive and how that drains a fighter as you go through the rounds. But Yoel Romero takes a lot of breaks. So he'll do something explosive, and then he'll dance around a bit. And then he'll do nothing for like 20 seconds, and then he'll do something else again. He really doesn't like to keep a pace. And what Robert Whittaker was able to do was to make him keep working through the rounds. And by the 5th round, he was mouth breathing, and Whittaker was actually teeing off on him in a few of those exchanges. Now, the downside of this is that obviously Whittaker wants to keep him working and try and keep the pace high without putting himself in too much danger. For Romero, I would want to see him push the pace a little bit more himself. You know, I don't think that Whittaker is the kind of guy that you can get out of there with simple bursts. You know, you're counting on getting a really clean connection, and sort of getting lucky with it. You know, it's not like Rockhold where he put himself in a really bad position and Romero realized it and pounced on it. Along the fence, and he always leans back for the check hook, so you pump the jab twice and throw the overhand and knock him out, or whatever it was. I can't remember what the actual combination was, but it was that lean back check hook way too close to the fence that got Rockhold knocked out. But, you know, Romero very rarely works in combination, and he very rarely throws a few strikes and then immediately comes in with a few more strikes. You know, it's always, you know that once it's already happened, once you felt the blows against your guard or whatever, that's it for a little while. You know, he doesn't push the pace well at all. And I think to really fluster Whittaker and stop him from simply using distance and range and all the other stuff that he has the edge in, the scientific stuff, I think he really needs to stay on him. Even if it's only for like a minute of each round, just pick like the middle minute of the round and then get on him and then chill and just circle for the rest of it. Whittaker's manager says that he's going to be making close to $2 million in this fight, or I think it was 2.5 Aussie dollars. Aussie bucks, come and spend them at the theme park. So that's incredible, you know, just in sponsorships and things. I've been hearing from Australian fans that everyone knows Mark Hunt, nobody knows Robert Whittaker, which is insane. And their previous fight was very low selling. I mean, they lost a title fight from that card. But this guy is, I would put him in the top 3 all-round technicians in MMA at the moment. I'd put him, probably Demetrius Johnson, just so the fans don't get their dicks in a twist. But maybe Max Holloway. Just all-around really technical guys. And, you know, Jacare and your Romero are better, you know, scarier opposition than anyone DJ's beaten in the last 2-3 years. He really is incredible. And, at this point we're talking like, well, we know that this is the best age of MMA in terms of skill. So we're talking about like one of the best technical fighters ever. And nobody knows him or cares. It's crazy. And of course he's a really nice guy. And of course he knocks a lot of dudes out. But what are you going to do? Hopefully they built up Yoel Romero as enough of a scary monster that if Whittaker wins here, it starts to rub off and people start getting excited for Whittaker. Doesn't help that he got super injured and then got a staph infection in his innards and had to take the best part of a year off, or is it closer to 2? I don't remember. But he's been out a long time, and this fight's been slated to happen for a long time. I was so excited about Rockhold versus Whittaker. That was insane. But at any rate, this is one of those fights that I love because both guys are very, very skilled. I mean, they're both very different sorts of athlete and very, very different in their approaches to things, but both guys have such a wide array of abilities. It makes the matchup damn near impossible to predict and just a super fun one on paper. Could turn out like Wonder Boy versus Till. You know, I was going, I can't see any way that this fight ends up boring, and then it did. But if the first fight was anything to go by, you know, because we can't paint it as Whittaker just styling all over Romero the first time. No, he was fighting a bull. He was in danger all the time, but he was handling it really, really well. And I hope we see some more of that. Or, you know, Romero gets the win and we get a rubber match. Hopefully not in a year's time. Or we get the Rockhold Whittaker match, maybe. Well, who knows? As long as Whittaker is fighting, I'm happy. Anyway, that'll do us on UFC 225. I will have a big piece on the specifics of that matchup coming out, hopefully tomorrow. And you know, the specifics of the first matchup and the kicks and the counter kicks and the combinations and things. So yeah, check that out. If you want to get the Dovbar, that's Barney Ross's real name, by the way, his real first name, Dovbar. If you want the Barney Ross episode, or you know, just to support the podcast or get in on their history episodes, sign up to the Patreon. That was supposed to be coming out this week, but it will be coming out on Saturday night now because this week is insane in terms of fights going on. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, go to the Fight Primer. I'm keeping it clean and keeping it updated, and hopefully I've got a nice idea for something I'm going to put on there soon. Send your messages of encouragement or disgust and your questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jackery Slack, and I'll catch you next week. Cheers!